The world as they knew it had already started to unravel. People were still adjusting to the strange, almost surreal changes that had begun sweeping across the globe. News reports spoke of outbreaks, initially contained to small, far-off towns, and whispers of something far more sinister than the usual pandemic. But no one had expected the world to descend into chaos so quickly. Maya Thompson, a 32-year-old survivalist and former military medic, was among the first to recognize the true danger. On a routine supply run through the outskirts of her city, she had seen the first signs of what was coming: wild-eyed, frantic people running in the streets, a sense of panic palpable in the air. Within days, society had fractured into pieces, the government's efforts to contain the outbreak crumbling. Within a week, the world was nothing like it had been. Maya had always believed in self-reliance. Her military training, her preparedness for any disaster, it all seemed to be paying off. But in a world where the dead walked and the living were as much of a threat as the infected, survival was no longer about individual strength. It was about trust. Who could you trust, and who would betray you the first chance they got? Maya's journey began in the remains of her neighborhood, the city she once called home now overrun by chaos. Armed with little more than a backpack of supplies, her military-grade gear, and a fierce resolve, she moved cautiously through the streets, avoiding the growing numbers of undead who had begun to haunt the area. Her only company was the occasional radio broadcast, filled with garbled messages from survivors and faint hopes of safe zones, but those too quickly became silent. Days turned into weeks as the world transformed into a hellish wasteland. The undead, once an abstract fear, had now become the dominating force in every aspect of life. But Maya knew that she had to keep moving forward, searching for others like her, others who might be able to help her navigate this dangerous new world. And there were whispers of others, those who might not only help her survive, but help rebuild what had been lost. The first sign that she wasn't alone came when she saw a small group of people, 5 in total, huddled in a dilapidated building not far from her own hideout. They had made a crude camp, using tarps and broken furniture for shelter. At first, Maya was cautious, but the need for companionship, for safety in numbers, tugged at her. Carefully, she approached the group, her gun lowered but ready in case things went sideways. The leader, a man named Paul, was the first to notice her. With a steady gaze, he assessed Maya, then raised a hand in a silent greeting. "Don't shoot," Paul said, his voice surprisingly calm, given the situation. "We're not looking for trouble." "Are you alone?" Maya didn't respond immediately. She couldn't afford to trust anyone too quickly, not in a world where betrayal was more common than kindness. But there was something about Paul's calm demeanor, his understanding of the situation, that made her hesitate. "I'm Maya," she finally said. "I'm alone. For now." Paul nodded, then motioned for her to join them. "We're in this together. If you want to make it, you have to trust each other. No one survives on their own anymore." Maya considered his words. Trust was everything now. In the old world, trust had been a commodity, something you gave only to those who earned it. But in the new world, it was all or nothing. She had to decide whether to take a leap of faith or keep moving forward, alone. The decision wasn't easy. The group, though small, had set up a reasonable perimeter around their camp. There were signs of effort, makeshift defenses and a small garden where they tried to grow what little food they could. Maya could see that they were surviving, but barely. And the longer she waited, the more certain she became that the world was pushing her to make a choice. "I'll stay for a while," Maya said finally, her voice steady. "But we need to be careful. Trust is something we can't afford to take lightly." Paul smiled, the weight of the situation apparent in his eyes. "That's the truth. But we're stronger together, Maya. The dead aren't the only threat out here." Maya nodded in agreement, her thoughts swirling with the implications of what they had just said. The days ahead would be fraught with danger, and every choice would weigh heavily on their survival. Could they trust each other? Or would fear and desperation tear them apart? As night fell, Maya joined the others around their small fire. They didn't speak much, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. This was the beginning of something bigger. In a world that had gone mad, Unity was the only thing that could keep them alive. Tomorrow, they would need to plan their next move. The dead were not the only threat they faced. The living, desperate for power or resources, were just as dangerous. But Maya couldn't help but feel that, together, they stood a chance. They had to. Because in this new world, divided, they would surely fall. The next morning, the group was already awake and preparing for their first major move since Maya had joined them. The small camp was filled with a sense of urgency that the growing day's light only seemed to intensify. The constant hum of the undead outside their makeshift barricades served as a grim reminder that they had no time to waste. Maya moved quietly, assessing the group as they went about their tasks. Paul, the leader, was directing a couple of others to reinforce the barricades, ensuring that their camp remained hidden from the prying eyes of the undead. Emily, a former teacher, was tending to the small garden they had started near the building's entrance. She spoke softly to the few plants that had managed to survive in the harsh conditions, though Maya could see the exhaustion in her eyes. At the corner of the camp, two younger men, Brian and Marcus, were scouting the perimeter, keeping watch for any movement. Maya observed them all closely. In a world that had been turned upside down, she understood the value of these small, seemingly insignificant routines. They were more than survival, they were a lifeline. Each person had their role, their contribution to the delicate balance of their existence. Yet Maya knew that this fragile unity was only as strong as the trust they placed in each other. As the day went on, the group gathered together to discuss their next course of action. Paul had suggested they make their way toward a nearby city, where rumors of a larger survivor settlement had begun to circulate. The idea was risky, but they needed supplies and, more importantly, they needed hope. The thought of a larger community, one that could provide safety and stability, was tempting, but it also carried its own dangers. "We can't just go charging in without a plan," Maya said, voicing the concern that had been weighing on her since the previous night. "We don't know what we're walking into. If there's a settlement, it could be run by people who aren't interested in sharing." Paul nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "We'll have to be careful. But if the rumors are true, we may be able to find allies, and more supplies. The alternative is sitting here waiting to die, or worse." The tension in the air was palpable. Emily, who had been quiet up until then, spoke up. "I don't trust the idea of strangers, especially in a place we don't know. But, we're running out of time. If we stay here much longer, we'll have nothing left. We have to take the risk." Maya could sense the fear in her voice. Emily wasn't the only one who was feeling the pressure. Marcus and Brian exchanged looks but didn't speak. The silence between them was filled with the weight of the decision. Everyone knew the stakes. Trusting others in a world so fractured could mean the difference between life and death. "Look, no matter what we decide, we need to stick together," Maya added, her voice steady. "Unity isn't just a choice, it's a necessity. If we let fear divide us now, we won't make it." Paul looked at her, his eyes searching hers for something, reassurance, perhaps. "You're right," he said quietly. "We move as one. No exceptions." The plan was simple. They would leave before nightfall, traveling on foot to the rumored settlement. The group would remain tight-knit, always watching each other's backs. There was no room for error. As they gathered their gear and began to prepare for the journey, Maya couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain: if they couldn't trust each other, they wouldn't survive. The sun was beginning to set as the group packed up their camp and moved toward the outskirts of the city. The streets, once filled with the hum of everyday life, were now eerily silent, save for the occasional shuffle of the undead. The journey was slow. They moved cautiously, staying in the shadows, avoiding the main roads where they were more likely to encounter groups of infected. Every so often, one of the undead would cross their path, and the group would freeze, holding their breath, waiting for the danger to pass. As night fell, the atmosphere shifted. The sounds of the city, the distant cries and moans of the undead, filled the air, adding an extra layer of tension. The group found a secluded alley to rest for the night, setting up a rudimentary camp. As they huddled together for warmth, the weight of their decision pressed down on them. Maya lay awake, her thoughts racing. She knew the importance of the coming days. Every move they made could tip the scales toward either survival or destruction. But it wasn't just the dangers of the undead or the scarcity of resources that worried her, it was the uncertainty of the people around her. Would they stay united, or would fear and desperation tear them apart? In a world where trust was everything, could they afford to risk their lives on others they barely knew? As the others fell asleep around her, Maya stared at the dark sky, her mind racing. The road ahead was treacherous, but she had no choice but to place her faith in this fragile alliance. Unity, she reminded herself, was their only chance. Divided, they would fall. And they couldn't afford to fail. The following morning brought no relief. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out like the grasp of something insidious. The group was on edge. The night had been quiet, but Maya knew that silence in this world could often be more dangerous than any sound. They continued on their journey, moving through narrow alleyways and abandoned streets. The world around them was a broken shell of what it had once been: burnt-out cars, shattered windows, and the occasional overturned trash can. It was as if civilization itself had been erased, leaving only the remnants of what used to be. Every step they took, every turn they made, felt like a countdown. Maya kept close to the others, making sure they didn't stray too far from each other. The city had become a maze, and every corner seemed to hold a new threat. The undead were everywhere, their slow shuffle and vacant eyes the only signs of life in a world that had lost its pulse. The group moved swiftly but quietly, aware that making too much noise could attract unwanted attention. After hours of navigating the decaying streets, they finally reached the outskirts of the city, where the tall buildings gave way to the more open terrain. Here, the rumors of a settlement had begun to take shape. The land was dotted with makeshift barricades, and the air seemed to hum with a strange energy. There were people here, survivors, though Maya wasn't sure whether that was a blessing or a curse. "Keep your heads down," Paul whispered, signaling for everyone to halt. "We don't know who we're dealing with yet." Maya, ever vigilant, scanned the area ahead. There were figures moving behind the barricades, shadows in the distance. Some were armed, others appeared to be tending to small gardens or other makeshift structures. This wasn't the safety they had imagined, but it was something, a potential haven, even if it was surrounded by dangers both human and undead. The group crept closer, staying out of sight, but as they neared a gap in the barricade, they were spotted. A single figure, a woman with a rifle slung over her shoulder, stepped into view. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her stance that screamed authority. "Who are you?" she called out sharply, her voice cutting through the air. There was no warmth in her tone, only suspicion. Paul raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "We're survivors," he said calmly. "We're just looking for shelter, for safety. We've heard there's a community here." The woman studied them for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she assessed each one of them. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her breathing steady, willing herself not to make any sudden movements. They were so close. So close to safety. But trust, once again, was the deciding factor. After what felt like an eternity, the woman spoke again. "Follow me. But no funny business. I'll take you to the leader. He makes the decisions here." Without waiting for a response, she turned and began walking, and the group had no choice but to follow. The narrow streets soon opened up to a small courtyard where more survivors had gathered. Some were working on repairs, others sitting around small fires, cooking or sharing what little food they had. It wasn't the utopia they had imagined, but it was something that, for a moment, made Maya feel a glimmer of hope. They were led into a modest building, its walls reinforced with scrap metal and wood. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cooking food and the quiet hum of conversation. A tall man with a thick beard sat at a table near the center of the room. He looked up as the woman entered with the group. "You're back," he said, his voice low and gravelly. His eyes flicked over them, scrutinizing each one. "What's this?" The woman spoke first. "They're survivors. They're asking for shelter." The man didn't immediately respond. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his gaze lingering on Paul. Maya could feel the tension in the room, the weight of every person in the building waiting for the leader's judgment. "I'm Marcus," the man said finally. "You're asking for shelter in a world that's anything but safe. Why should we take you in?" Paul stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Because we're not looking to take anything from you. We're just trying to survive, just like everyone else. We'll work, we'll contribute. We just need a place to stay." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then looked at Maya, Emily, and the others. Maya didn't flinch, but her mind was racing. They couldn't afford to be too trusting, not when the stakes were so high. She wanted to believe Marcus, to believe that there was a community that was truly looking out for each other, but after everything they had been through, how could they know for sure? "All right," Marcus said finally, nodding. "You can stay for a few days. But don't get comfortable. We're not running a charity here. You'll have to prove yourselves." The woman who had first greeted them stepped forward. "I'll show them where to sleep. But they start working tomorrow, right?" Marcus gave a short nod. "Tomorrow. If they're still here by then." As the woman led them away to a small area where they could rest, Maya felt a mix of emotions. They had made it. They had found shelter, at least for now. But the doubts that had been gnawing at her since the night they left the abandoned building still lingered. Trust was everything in this world, but how could they truly trust people they had just met? In a world where survival was a game of alliances and betrayals, what would happen when trust was tested? As the group settled in for the night, Maya's mind wouldn't quiet. She lay on the cold floor, her eyes tracing the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Would they prove their worth? Would this new community welcome them, or would it be just another illusion of safety in a world that no longer had any guarantees? One thing was certain, they had to stay united. Because without that, they would fall. And in this world, falling meant more than just death. It meant becoming something else, something worse. The first day in the settlement passed without incident. The work was grueling, but the group had learned quickly that it was their best chance at earning the trust of Marcus and the others. They spent the morning helping to reinforce barricades and clear debris from the surrounding area, while Emily and Maya took on the task of scavenging for supplies in the nearby buildings. The work was hard, but the group moved with purpose, as if every task was a step toward earning their place in this fragile community. As the day wore on, the temperature began to rise, and the reality of their situation set in. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. They had found shelter, but that didn't mean they were free from the ever-present threat of the undead or the other dangers of a world gone mad. And in the back of Maya's mind, a nagging question remained: could they trust these people? Could they trust Marcus? The day ended with everyone returning to the makeshift courtyard to rest. The group huddled together near a small fire, their faces drawn and tired. The settlement was quiet, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant moans of the undead. No one spoke much, the tension between them and the rest of the survivors palpable in the air. As the firelight danced across their faces, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The settlement, though functional, had the feel of a place that was holding its breath. The survivors here were not the smiling, welcoming faces she had hoped for. They were hardened, distrustful, and constantly looking over their shoulders. There was no warmth in the way they interacted with each other. It was a survivalist mentality, pure and simple. Paul, sitting beside her, seemed to share her thoughts. "We're still strangers to them," he said quietly, his voice low so only she could hear. "But we can't afford to stand out." "Not yet." Maya nodded, her eyes scanning the settlement, the other survivors moving around the courtyard. "We have to be careful. We don't know how long this will last. If they see us as a threat, or worse, as competition for resources, it could turn on us in an instant." "I know," Paul said. "But we can't keep running forever. We need a place to stay, to rebuild. This might be our best shot." Before Maya could respond, Emily approached them, her face drawn with exhaustion. "We need to talk," she said, her voice urgent. "Something's off here." Maya raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Emily glanced around, her eyes darting to the other survivors nearby. I don't know. It's just, the way they're all acting. I've been talking to a few of them, and they're scared. Really scared. They keep talking about something, some threat that's coming. I don't think it's just the undead. There's something else going on. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected that there was more to this settlement than what they were being told, but hearing it from Emily only made her more certain. What kind of threat? She asked quietly. I don't know, Emily said, shaking her head. But I overheard Marcus talking to someone about a group called the Ravens. They're apparently a gang that's been causing trouble in the area. From what I gathered, they're ruthless, and they're coming this way. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard of gangs like the Ravens before. They were notorious for raiding settlements, taking what they wanted, and leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. But she hadn't expected such a group to be near this place, at least, not so soon. Do you think Marcus knows more than he's letting on? Maya asked, her tone skeptical. Emily nodded. I'm sure of it. He's been keeping things from us. I don't know if he's hiding it out of fear or if he has some kind of deal with them, but I don't trust him. Maya's mind raced. She had trusted Marcus to be their guide, their safe passage to a new chance at survival. But now it seemed like the very thing they had hoped would protect them might be the reason they were in more danger than they had realized. If there was one thing she knew for certain, it was that survival wasn't just about avoiding the undead, it was about navigating the politics and betrayals of the living. Okay, Maya said, her voice firm. We need to stay close. Watch what happens next. If Marcus is hiding something, we'll have to decide whether we're willing to stand by him, or if we need to leave before things get worse. Paul's eyes darkened. If the Ravens are coming, we don't have a lot of time. We'll have to make our move quickly. The group sat in tense silence for a moment, each of them lost in their thoughts. The fire crackled, but the warmth it provided seemed to be fading. The shadows in the distance grew longer, stretching across the courtyard, as if the very night itself was closing in on them. Later that night, when the settlement finally fell into an uneasy sleep, Maya lay wide awake, her mind whirring. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that there were eyes in the shadows. The Ravens, Marcus, the other survivors, she didn't know who could be trusted anymore. But one thing was becoming clear, the power of unity that had brought them this far could just as easily tear them apart. In a world where trust was the rarest commodity, even the smallest betrayal could mean the difference between life and death. Maya had made it this far by keeping her head and trusting her instincts. And right now, those instincts were telling her that the stakes were higher than ever. The question was no longer whether they could trust Marcus, it was whether they could trust each other. And in a world where survival depended on unity, they would soon find out just how far they were willing to go. The sun was barely up, but the air felt heavy, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Maya stood by the fire, absent-mindedly stirring a pot of water as the rest of the group gathered their belongings and prepared for another day of work. The atmosphere was tense, unspoken words lingered in the air, and every glance felt loaded with suspicion. Emily's warning from the night before had only deepened the unease that had settled in the pit of Maya's stomach. As they gathered their tools for the day, Maya noticed that some of the other survivors were acting differently. They moved with more urgency, more purpose, as if they knew something the others didn't. There were whispers, quick conversations held in corners, and sidelong glances exchanged between the leaders of the settlement. But no one was speaking openly about what was coming. Marcus hadn't addressed the group yet, but Maya could sense that his presence loomed large over the settlement. His silence was an eerie kind of authority, he didn't need to say much to make people listen. He was the rock, the figure who had united these survivors, but now, there was a crack in that foundation, and Maya could see it clearly. Trust was wearing thin, and cracks in the group's unity were starting to show. Emily leaned in close to Maya as they prepared to head out to the barricades. I don't like this, she muttered, her voice low. Something's wrong. I'm telling you, Marcus is hiding something. I know, Maya replied, her eyes scanning the settlement, watching for any sign of movement that might confirm Emily's fears. But we need to be careful. If we confront him directly, it could make things worse. We don't know how he'll react, and if he's really hiding something, he could turn on us. Emily nodded but didn't look convinced. Then what do we do? Maya bit her lip, considering. We gather information. Keep your eyes open. If we can find out what's really going on, maybe we can make a plan. But we can't act too quickly. As the group moved out to the perimeter, Maya's mind was racing. She felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, suffocating her with every step she took. The Ravens, who were they really? What was their connection to Marcus? And what kind of hold did the leader have over the rest of the survivors? For the next few hours, Maya kept her head down, focusing on the task at hand. She worked alongside Emily, fixing barricades and collecting supplies from the nearby buildings. But her mind was elsewhere, constantly drifting back to the unsettling thoughts that had been gnawing at her. As the day wore on, she began to feel the pressure mounting, as if something big was coming. The silence in the settlement grew louder, a quiet before the storm. By midday, Marcus finally addressed the group. His voice was firm, but there was a noticeable tension in his posture. He stood in front of the survivors, looking every bit the leader, but there was an edge to him now, an edge that hadn't been there before. I've received word that the Ravens are moving closer, Marcus said, his voice calm but laced with an underlying fear. They're heading this way, and we need to be ready. A murmur spread through the crowd. The tension in the air thickened, and Maya could see the fear creeping into the eyes of the others. They had all heard stories about the Ravens, their brutality, their ruthless raids. But hearing Marcus speak so openly about it made the danger feel real in a way it hadn't before. We need to reinforce the barricades and prepare for a possible attack, Marcus continued, his voice steady. Everyone needs to do their part. Maya exchanged a glance with Paul, who had been watching Marcus intently. There was something in his eyes, a silent question that neither of them dared to voice out loud. The Ravens were a threat, but was Marcus telling the whole truth? Or was he using their fear to tighten his grip on the community? After the meeting broke up, Maya and the others went to work. The entire settlement was on edge, moving quickly to fortify their positions and gather what little resources they had left. Maya helped to reinforce the barricades at the perimeter, but every time she looked over at the others, she felt the suspicion growing stronger. Everyone was working together, yes, but there was a sense that something was being hidden from them. And Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was at the center of it all. As evening descended and the air grew cooler, the survivors gathered again around the central fire. There was no sense of camaraderie, no shared relief in the gathering. It was simply a necessary pause before the next step, before whatever would come next. Maya, Emily, and Paul sat together, speaking in hushed tones, their voices barely audible over the crackling fire. We have to find out what Marcus is hiding, Emily said, her eyes flicking nervously around the settlement. We can't just sit here and wait to be attacked. Maya nodded. Agreed. But we need to be careful. If we go after Marcus too aggressively, we risk losing what little we have left. We can't let them think we're a threat to the community. Paul frowned. So, what's the plan? We get close to the others, Maya said, her mind racing. We talk to the people who might know more about Marcus. We listen for any inconsistencies in his story. We need to gather information, build a case before we act. But if he's already hiding something, what makes you think the others will tell us the truth? Paul asked. Because people are scared, Maya replied, her eyes locking with his. And when people are scared, they talk. They'll reveal the cracks, the lies. We just need to be patient. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the settlement. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, knowing that time was running out. The Ravens were coming, and in a world where trust had become a luxury, every decision they made could be the difference between survival and death. Unity had brought them this far, but Maya knew that in a world like this, it could just as easily be the thing that tore them apart. And when the breaking point came, would they stand together, or would they fall alone? Night fell with an uneasy silence. The flickering torchlights barely cut through the thick darkness surrounding the settlement. Most survivors had retreated into their shelters, but Maya stayed awake, staring out beyond the crude barricades, her senses sharp. Something didn't feel right. Not just the looming threat of the ravens, but the way Marcus had delivered the warning, the fear he stirred, and the cold way he dismissed any questions. Emily quietly crept up beside her, carrying 2 cups of hot water. "Couldn't sleep either," she whispered. Maya took the cup, nodded. "There's more going on here, Em. I feel it in my bones." Emily glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in. "I did some digging." Maya turned to face her. "There's a storage room behind the old infirmary," Emily said. "I saw Marcus and 2 of his people go in late last night. They were carrying something, crates. Heavy ones." "What was in them?" Maya asked. "No idea," Emily replied. "But whatever it wasn't medicine or food. I think they're stockpiling something, maybe weapons. Maybe supplies for themselves, not the group." Maya's mind raced. Could Marcus be preparing to abandon the settlement once the ravens came? Was he planning to flee, leaving the rest behind? "We need to get inside that room," Maya whispered. Emily hesitated. "Tonight?" Maya nodded. "Before the ravens get here, we need to know what Marcus is really planning." Later that night, while most of the settlement lay in restless slumber, Maya, Emily, and Paul slipped into the shadows. The infirmary sat at the far end of the compound, near the outer wall. It was dark, save for a small lantern hanging by the door. Paul kept watch while Maya and Emily crept around to the back. Just as Emily had described, there was a side entrance, locked, but not reinforced. Maya pulled out a rusted crowbar they had scavenged days earlier. She wedged it between the door and frame, her muscles straining. After a long moment, the lock gave a soft snap, and the door creaked open. They stepped inside. The room was musty and dim, but even in the low light, the truth hit them immediately. Crates lined the walls, stacked high, labeled with military markings. Inside were sealed packages of food, medical kits, ammunition, and high-grade weapons. More than enough to supply the entire settlement for weeks, yet none of this had ever been distributed. Emily's voice trembled. "He's hoarding." Maya ran her hand over the smooth edge of a rifle. "And planning for something." They barely had time to think before a voice barked behind them. "What the hell are you doing?" They spun around to find one of Marcus's lieutenants, Devin, standing in the doorway, gun raised, face full of fury. Paul appeared behind him, his own weapon drawn. "Put it down, Devin." Devin hesitated. "You have no idea what you're messing with." "Then explain it," Maya snapped. "Why is all this hidden back here? Why are you keeping it from the others while people ration scraps?" Devin's jaw clenched. For a moment, it looked like he might pull the trigger, but then, slowly, he lowered his gun. "You think Marcus doesn't know what he's doing?" Devin said. "He's trying to keep this place alive. You start handing out everything we've got, it's gone in a week." "Then what?" "This isn't about survival," Emily said. "This is control. You're building an escape plan. For a few. Not for everyone." Devin didn't deny it. "He knew the ravens were coming," Maya said quietly. "Didn't he?" Devin nodded reluctantly. "We've been buying time. Marcus made a deal with them weeks ago. Supplies in exchange for peace." Emily's voice rose, filled with disbelief. "So we're feeding raiders while our own people go hungry?" Devin looked pained. "It was the only way. He was going to fake a raid, make it look like we fought back. Let them take the supplies and leave. But you've ruined that plan." "No," Maya said firmly. "We just exposed it." Back at the fire, the group sat in silence, the stolen knowledge weighing heavy in their minds. Marcus's deal with the ravens, the stockpiled supplies, the planned deception, it all pointed to one truth. They were pawns in a game they didn't know they were playing. "I don't know what we do next," Paul said, shaking his head. But if we stay silent, we're no better than them. We expose him, Maya said. Not just to the group, but to everyone. If unity is what keeps us alive, then truth is the only way we protect it. Emily glanced toward the shadows. But once we do, Marcus won't let us stay. Maya looked up, her eyes resolute. Then we'll take a stand. Together. For once, we won't let someone else decide who lives and who gets left behind. For the first time since they'd entered the settlement, the three of them felt a dangerous shift, not in the undead outside the walls, but in the power that ruled from within. The battle ahead wouldn't just be for survival against the horde. It would be for the soul of the community. And the real war was just beginning. The sun rose blood-red the next morning, casting an eerie glow over the settlement. The usual morning routines, checking barricades, boiling water, counting rations, were carried out with a strange quiet. But beneath the surface, something had changed. Maya, Emily, and Paul moved quickly, spreading the truth to those they trusted most. Whispered conversations intense, cautious exchanges in the shadows, words spread like wildfire. Marcus had hoarded supplies. Marcus had struck a secret deal with the Ravens. Marcus had chosen who would live, and who would be left behind. The betrayal stung deeper than any wound. These people had survived together, bled together, buried friends side by side. To hear that the man they had followed was planning to sacrifice them for his own escape ignited a fury that could not be contained. By midday, tension hung heavy in the air. Workers moved slower, eyes sharper. Guards at the wall looked distracted. And Marcus. Marcus knew something was coming. He stood on the main platform near the central fire, calling a meeting, his voice booming over the settlement. "We face a threat like no other," he declared. "The Ravens are days away. We must stay united and trust each other more than ever." Maya and her group stood at the edge of the crowd, hearts pounding. They knew this moment was everything. Emily stepped forward first. "Tell them the truth, Marcus," she said, voice loud and unwavering. "About the deal with the Ravens. About the supplies. About how you planned to run while we died." A hush fell. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Lies," he said coldly. "Desperation from people who want chaos." "We saw the storeroom," Paul said. "We saw the weapons, the food. You weren't going to fight. You were going to leave us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Survivors who had once looked at Marcus with admiration now exchanged worried, confused glances. Devin stepped forward, face pale. "It's true," he admitted. "Marcus made the deal." The crowd exploded with anger. People began shouting, demands for answers, cries of betrayal, threats. Marcus raised his hands, trying to speak over them, but the tide had turned. "You were supposed to protect us," one woman screamed. "Not trade our lives away." "You had a choice," Maya said, stepping forward. "You could have trusted us. We would have fought together. But you wanted control. And now, you've lost it." Marcus stared at her. Cold. Calculating. For a moment, it looked like he might lash out. But then, he turned to walk away. Devin blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere." "What now?" Emily whispered to Maya. "We take back our future," Maya replied. "And prepare for the real fight." That night, the settlement gathered, truly gathered, for the first time in weeks. No longer under one man's command, they were a community again. A council was formed. Maya, Emily, Paul, and even Devin were voted onto it. Supplies were brought out and divided evenly. Weapons were handed to those who could fight. Plans were drawn. The Ravens were still coming. But now, they would meet a united front. In a world gone mad, where the dead walked and the living betrayed each other, trust had become rare. Precious. Powerful. They had almost lost it completely. But now, standing side by side, they had something stronger than fear, they had each other. And when the Horde, or the Ravens, came crashing through those walls, they would not scatter. They would stand. The sound came at dawn. Distant engines. Screeching tires. Boots hitting the ground in rhythm. The ravens had arrived. From atop the watchtower, Maya watched the dust cloud rise along the broken highway. Trucks, 6 of them, approached fast, loaded with rough men wielding rusted blades and scavenged guns. The enemy was real now, not just a whisper in Marcus's voice or a threat in the dark. "They're here," she whispered into her radio. Down below, the settlement was ready. The old barricades had been reinforced with steel, furniture, and even wrecked vehicles. Sandbags lined the inner defenses. Rooftop lookouts were stationed with rifles. Civilians were evacuated to the storage bunker. No one ran. No one cried. They waited. Devin stood beside Paul at the west gate, shotgun slung over his shoulder. Emily and several others had taken positions along the rooftop, bows drawn, Molotovs within reach. And at the center, by the main gate, Maya stood tall, calm, steady, no longer just a survivor. She was a leader now. The truck screeched to a halt. Men spilled out, armored in patchwork leather, faces smeared with war paint. Their leader stepped forward, tall, cruel eyes, a jagged scar cutting across his cheek. He called out with a smirk. "You must be the new boss." "Not Marcus, huh?" Maya didn't flinch. "Marcus is gone. We don't serve tyrants anymore." The man laughed. "Cute speech. But your little vote in council don't change how this works. You give us what we want, or we take it. Either way, you lose." Maya raised a hand. All around the settlement, weapons lifted. "Ready. Come and try," she said. A beat of silence. Then chaos erupted. The ravens charged forward, bullets flying. But the defenders were ready. The first truck exploded in flames as a Molotov struck its fuel tank. Arrows rained from the rooftops, forcing the raiders to take cover. Devin and Paul opened fire from behind the barricades, dropping 2 of them before they reached the gate. The gate held, for now. The ravens regrouped and tried to flank from the east, but Emily's team met them halfway in a narrow alley, ambushing them with smoke bombs and nail-studded bats. The fight was brutal. Close. Blood on both sides. But the settlement held firm. Then, a second sound rose, different. A low moan. A rattling growl. From the forest beyond the road, the dead emerged. Dozens. Drawn by the noise, by the fire. A tide of rotting flesh. The battlefield turned to madness as the ravens and defenders alike realized their fight had summoned a greater threat. The zombies didn't care who was armed or armored, they devoured indiscriminately. Maya shouted into her radio, "Fall back to inner defenses. Let the horde deal with the rest." As the ravens tried to retreat, they found themselves trapped, between bullets and teeth. Some fled, some fell, and a few, including their scar-faced leader, were swarmed and ripped apart. By the time the sun broke fully across the sky, the screaming had stopped. Only the settlement remained. Cleanup took hours. The cost was high, several defenders lost, many wounded, but the core had survived. And more importantly, they had won. Emily limped over to Maya, blood on her sleeve, but a grin on her face. "We did it. Not because of luck, but because we trusted each other." Paul nodded. "This place, it's something worth fighting for now." Devin stepped forward, laying down his gun. "I know I was part of the problem before. But if you'll have me, I want to help build something better." Maya looked at him, then the others. "We all were broken before," she said. "But unity doesn't mean perfection. It means we keep showing up. For each other. No secrets. No sacrifices. Only strength and standing side by side." The crowd that gathered around them, exhausted, battered, but alive, cheered. This was not just survival. It was a new beginning. In a world where the undead ruled and betrayal lurked in every shadow, they had found something more powerful than any weapon: trust. And together, they would rebuild.